this morning. Good morning, Raywat.
Good morning.
Now, this reopening plan caught everybody a little off guard yesterday because Dr. Kieran Moore had said that we were going to stay in stage 3 for 21 days. But how do you see this as a positive, this speed up?
No, I don't. Now, it might be fine. It's just 5 days in advance of what was projected. But the 3 to 4 week interval between stages was rational. And I don't know why we're deviating from that. I suspect it's because of some lobbying efforts. But it strikes me as an unnecessary small risk, but still a risk nonetheless.
And I guess I've been kind of of the mind that, what's the point of rushing to reopen considering everything that we've gone through? That's my own personal opinion. But when you see people clamoring for all these reopenings to happen, looking at the case numbers, the vaccination rates going up, I guess what's your biggest cause for concern and caution?
Well, first, we don't seem to learn, do we? We've been through this dance multiple times this past 15 months, and yet we keep doing the same thing over and over again. The takeaway for me, or the lesson that I think people don't understand yet, is that the modeling is based on what we saw at the end of the third wave when Alpha was the dominant variant. Alpha was the so-called UK variant, very transmissible. Now Delta is becoming the dominant variant, and that changes the situation significantly. If we're going to learn, we have to learn from other countries' experiences. So Israel is back into something resembling a lockdown, not really a lockdown, but the restrictions are reimposed because of their experiences with Delta. The UK is wrestling with Delta despite their reopening plans, and they might tumble like a house of cards if things go poorly there. So if we're going to learn from those scenarios, then we should take our time and readjust the thresholds for opening up things here. What I mean by that is it's rational to look at the proportion of people who are doubly vaccinated to guide our reopening plans. That proportion, though, needs to be ratcheted up because Delta is becoming, if it isn't already, dominant in Ontario, and that requires a higher level of vaccination.
And are you satisfied with the level of the vaccinations that's been happening so far? I know we've been ramping up. Over half of Ontarians now fully vaccinated.
Oh, it's remarkable how quickly we've done it. Much faster than I thought we would. It's very inspiring. I'm concerned on two fronts. One is the upper limit of vaccine acceptance. And I gauge that by looking at the percentage of people with at least one dose. That's close to 80% in Ontario right now. And above that, it's difficult to cajole people into getting one dose. And I care about the one dose because that tells me what the soft upper limit is for 2 doses. We're going to need to get over 80%, right? Probably 90% or higher. And that tells me we're going to have some cajoling and some incentivization to look into. And the second thing I'm concerned about is, of course, the rate in which we can get it into arms to prevent Delta taking hold in light of a rushed reopening strategy. This is all about identifying a susceptible population. In epidemiology, the susceptible population are the people who can still become infected. And you remove yourself from that susceptible group by either dying, by getting the disease and recovering, or by getting immunity by vaccination. We still have a large susceptible population. And so long as that population remains large, the threat of additional waves continues. So we have to get that population down to a certain level where the probability of new waves becomes so low that we don't have to think about it anymore.
It sounds like, just in terms of the upper level of kind of vaccine uptake, just talk about hesitancy a little bit, but outside of the crazy conspiracy theories that we've heard online about 5G and all this stuff, what do you see any legitimate concerns? And of course, everybody should be getting this shot if they can. But do you see any legitimate concerns from people who are hesitant?
Oh yes, I mean I got a lot of time for genuinely hesitant people who aren't just reflexive anti-vaxxers, because this is a thing you inject into your body. And the thing about vaccines as opposed to medications is you feel healthy when you get a vaccine, and you're wondering, why am I getting this thing when I'm otherwise healthy? Medicines are for curing me when I'm sick. And that's a difficult thing to process in your brain, that I'm doing something preventative. And there are genuine risks. I mean, the risks are tiny, like 0.006% for myocarditis and other kinds of things. And the risk of side effects like fever symptoms and flu-like symptoms is higher, and people don't like that. So I get it. And for injecting our kids, we don't know what the long-term implications are because the vaccines have been with us only for a year or so. But the probability is extremely low that anything bad would happen based upon the animal models, based upon what we've seen in similar vaccines and similar approaches. So being an adult in the 21st century means weighing risk versus reward and accepting that nothing is without risk and there are no certainties. And that's the conversation I try to have with people, to understand that I can't give you guarantees. I can give you probabilities.
That makes sense. I think we're seeing the efficacy now of that vaccine with the less hospitalizations. No.
Absolutely. That's the thing. I mean, the scary news is the efficacy around symptomatic disease might be challenged. In Israel, it seems to be diminishing, but the efficacy against hospitalization remains quite high. And that's the game changer. That means we probably won't need to lock down again, barring some really unforeseen circumstance like a truly voracious and monstrous variant arising.
Yeah, I know people will be very happy to hear that. Just sticking with vaccinations, I saw Pfizer this week saying that they're already talking about possible boosters, a third shot for next year. Now, drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, they're there to make a buck too. But we've talked about this before, that there probably will be a need for a flu shot type booster. So, what do you make of this? That it's so quickly kind of being put out there as a possibility.
Well, this comes from experience. Comes from two things. One is a small study of a very small number of people looking at when the antibody content seems to wane. It looks like 6 months based upon this small study. And it comes from data out of Israel, where they're finding that the people who got vaccinated early seem to be the ones who are getting reinfected. And there's a couple of things to take away from there. One is it might have to do with the interdose interval. Maybe they got their second shot too early. It may be the kinds of people who are vaccinated. Maybe the elderly are more likely to have waning immunity. Also, we're talking here about antibodies, not necessarily about T cells and the other kind of immunity. There are a lot of unknowns still. I think the takeaway has to be that we are going to get booster shots made available at some point, likely. Will it be this year? Will it be next year? Will it be the year after? And hopefully that booster shot will be a multivalent one, meaning it'll contain elements of the variants so that our immunity becomes supercharged. All right, so I think people have to understand that in order for us to, quote unquote, live with this disease and not to think about it much anymore, a large number of us have to consider getting booster shots at some point in the future.
And do you anticipate any more any more vaccines being approved for use here in Canada? I know we're still waiting on the J&J. There's been other ones as well, but do you anticipate the roster or the stockpile to change at all over the next bit?
Yes, I do, and I'm quite excited by this, in fact. I'm very excited by one called Novavax, which uses a slightly older technology that'll probably scare people a little less. It's not mRNA, it's old-fashioned antigen-style vaccine, and the reports right now are that it is extraordinarily efficacious and very, very safe. So Novavax, I think, will be a game changer. The other is Medicago, and Canada makes Medicago. We haven't got data for it yet, but it's a plant-based vaccine. You literally grow it out of a plant, right? So
That's
manufacturing
incredible.
might be easier, allergies will be fewer, reactions might be less. Those two, I think, are going to be game changers, and I think they'll position Canada, because we'll be manufacturing Novavax, as important vaccine contributors to the global challenge.
That's what I was going to say. Do you anticipate, or I guess, how long do you anticipate it is going to take for the rest of the world to catch up here? Are we talking months or years?
That's a question of political will. We could do this in months. We could do it in weeks if we wanted to, frankly. I think, if we made this a Manhattan-level endeavor for the entire globe. But the political will is not there for that. So I think it's going to be years. I think we're looking at possibly 2 years before we can get sufficient doses into the entire world to make the pandemic entirely go away. But again, political will. All it takes is a decision to do it. We can get it done by middle of next year if we want to, I think.
Yeah, and we'll see how that will kind of shapes out over the next little while. Vaccine passports being used in Quebec this week was an announcement made. Now, they said that wasn't going to be for essential services and things like that, but it would be for high-risk settings like gyms, some large sporting events, things like that. Do you think this is the right way to go for Quebec and maybe even here in Ontario?
I do think so, and for a number of reasons. One is it's the fastest way to get us back to some semblance of normal. Two is it's an incentive for people who haven't been vaccinated to get vaccinated. And three is it's not unethical, and here's why. We're not denying service to anybody. A vaccine passport like this says in order to get into a gym, for example, you need to show proof of either vaccination, recovery from COVID, which lends immunity of its own, or a recent negative swab test. So if you haven't been vaccinated, it just means you have to go through a couple of extra steps to get these services, right? So that takes away the ethical concerns about reductions in access for a certain segment of the population. And it makes public health job a lot easier and allows society to remain open. We've seen it happen in Israel and Denmark and other countries. So we have a template to go by. And what we've seen, it has not led to an overreach of government, as people fear. It has not led to Big Brother monitoring every movement. What it's led to is a better open society and use of that tool waning quickly as normal returns.
And is it a proper comparison here to think about, we have vaccination cards that we need to get signed to go to public school here in Ontario and to travel to different countries around the world? Some extra kind of vaccines are needed as well. Is this just very similar to that?
It's similar, but it's a bit different. I mean, if let's say you got to get proof of yellow fever vaccination to go to a country where yellow fever is endemic, there is no other way in there. Whereas this, you can get in with a proof of not having the disease, right? So it's more liberal than the current vaccine passports in many ways. So I think the arguments against it from ethics standpoint are unfounded, and I get those arguments. I share these civil libertarian concerns as a brown guy walking around. I don't like to be asked for my papers. I get that, but this is not what that is.
Fair enough. You understand. The unvaccinated, just the last one for you. The Prime Minister this week saying it's going to be some time before we accept unvaccinated travelers into this country. Now, that seems like a no-brainer, but there is some backlash about this from the business community more. But what do you think about that, the idea of bringing in unvaccinated travelers to our country?
I think the Prime Minister is correct in this. Look, everybody wants everything now. I think we have to prioritize what we want. I think we want our schools open. We want our local businesses open. We want our restaurants and gyms open. Okay, if we prioritize that, that means other things like tourism and incoming business travelers have to take a backseat for the moment. That's the choice here. And if we want those other things to be on the table, then we have to tolerate some deeper public health restrictions in our lives, and nobody wants that. So given those two choices, I think we have to choose keeping out travelers as long as we can while we manage the situation domestically.
That makes sense to me. But that's all the time we have today, Raywat. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It's Raywat Deonandan, epidemiologist, science communicator with the University of Ottawa, chatting about all the updates we've seen this week because of COVID-19.